Hey, I'm Mike Robbins. I was born in Amory, Mississippi in 1946. My dad was working for the railroad at that time. The Frisco Railroad had a hub in Amory, and I was born there. And soon after the war, as many of the soldiers were coming home, he was laid off, the term I think they used, from the service there at the railroad, and he and my mother moved, the three of us, my older sister Norma Ruth, my older brother John, and me, back to his hometown of New Albany. And that's how we ended up here. And I ended up growing up here, went to school at Cleveland Street Elementary, it was then. Now I think it became Mattie Thompson. Then went across town to the junior high school, which was part of the original New Albany High School. And then my sophomore year, the new school opened out on the highway there, and we moved to W.P. Daniel High School. And athletics was a big part of my life, particularly growing up. Anywhere there was a vacant spot, it didn't have to be a real big yard, just room for a couple of guys to get together, and pretty much year round. I was following my older brother around, to be perfectly honest, usually playing ball with the big boys, and any ball. Football in the fall usually, basketball bouncing around during the winter months, and then come spring, that's eternal. And then baseball hit, and that was sort of a love, of course, always. And as I said, usually it's a side yard, a little bit space, two or three guys throwing, catching, hitting, running. Three or four then becomes a game. And man, when you got six, it was on. And I was fortunate in that I did, as I said, follow my big brother around. And as a result, I got to know older boys, and these became my heroes. My older sister then, I got to know her friends and all, and those were big guys, and they were big heroes for me growing on. And the good thing about New Albany is the people were just so special. Those big guys, the older men, the older boys, looked after the little guys. They treated you well, and when a hero speaks to you, it really means something. And so I was so fortunate to have that happen for me, and to be in a good school system, a great educational environment, a good community, a wholesome community, and so many people that love sports and love the good part of sports. And so I would follow along. And as I say, in today's time, we talk in travel ball about kids playing up. They play at the next older level, and they're so good, they move on up. They're 8 years old, they play with the 10s and so forth. Well, pretty much I got to play up all the time. I was following my brother around, and I played up with the big boys. And, we were over here on the north side of town, and I played with those guys when as I said earlier, two or three gathered, and we'd play. Well, we'd venture over in the south side of town. They'd kind of hide me over on the side and choose me late. They say, oh, well, we'll take him if that works. Well, 3 or 4 times over, I started getting chosen by the South team occasionally. It does help to play with the older boys, and they took interest in me, they supported me, and this just carried on for basically my whole time here in New Albany. I just can't say enough about how many folks invested in me, older people, the total community downtown, the adults. They all just supported us, invested, particularly, I just go individual. I hate to be selfish, but individually they invested in me. And I felt that, and I'm so appreciative of that through all these years, to look back and know my older heroes, that looked to me and just helped me and encouraged me. And then the grown-ups in town that did the same, and just, that you knew they expected a lot from you, particularly, as I jokingly say, it wasn't anything for somebody else's mother or daddy to kind of straighten you out if you ever got across way. So you really were, and boy, if they did, you sure didn't want to go home, because it was going to be tough when you got there. And even though we didn't have cell phones, somehow that landline always managed to reach home every time, and somebody answered if there was a problem. But seriously, I just can't say enough about my love for New Albany and the support I had, and how blessed and honored I am to have had so many people invest in me. And I go back to athletics, and that's kind of, I think, what you were, we're here to talk about a sporting life, I think was even the title you gave me. The athletics have meant so much to me. And as we came along, my group, the group that graduated in 1964, as a ninth grade group, back in the the fall of '60, a lot of us guys have been playing up, had to play up all of a sudden. There were 6 of the freshmen on that football team, of a total of 26 guys out for the team, ended up playing extensively and starting on the team that went 0-11. Oh goodness, it was really tough. I jokingly say, the third game of the year we scored a touchdown, so the coach extended our curfew. He let us stay out an extra hour because we finally scored a touchdown. It was a tough year. It was a learning year, and those coaches did not get terminated. They did not get fired, but they chose to move on. And one of the head coach, Coach Roten, who was a great guy, moved back to his hometown of Corinth to head up the YMCA program there, which was a good situation for him. And the assistant coach, Bradley Sanders, who was our baseball coach, signed on to go to Pontotoc with a friend of his, Coach Charles Duck, who was the head coach there. So we were open for a whole new group of coaches. And that spring, a guy by the name of John Wallace Blaylock, former quarterback at Ole Miss on some of Johnny Balk's great teams, came over to student teach. He had been off to the Army for a couple of years and came back to Ole Miss to finish his degree and was student teaching here. He was asked to basically run the whole spring practice by himself that spring. And oh goodness, he decided to run it. He was organized. He was a quarterback, so he was used to running things on a team. He organized us. He had managers with lists to blow a whistle at certain times. We changed stations. We moved. He coached every position. Did a great job of organizing us and getting us going. And I remember during spring break. Now I don't think spring holidays are the same as they were then. But at that time we usually had a couple of days off, like Thursday and Friday in the spring, where the teachers were completely off. And anyway, we were practicing I remember it was a Thursday morning. Over by the old high school up on one of the fields, and Coach Blaylock had us going. And I look up on the top of the hill, there was the biggest, burliest, and I love Coach Ward so much, hate to call him ugly, but man, he was scary looking. He had a full beard, but he was at Boonville at the time, and Boonville was going through this centennial celebration. He had grown a full beard. And if some of you remember, Coach Ward had a huge scar across his eyebrow. I think he'd gotten kicked by a horse or something as a child, and had an indented scar that, he was distinguishable for sure. But boy, he was a tough looking dude up on top of that hill, and I just thought he was so huge too. He looked like Paul Bunyan standing up there watching us. And I realized later that he was there to be interviewed for the head coaching job by the school board and the superintendent, and he decided to come over and be our head coach. And he brought with him a young man named Richard Brown, who he'd coached there in Boonville and was coaching at Aberdeen at the time. And he told that interview group that he wanted to keep that guy that was down there running the practice too. And Coach Blaylock ended up staying. And I have to say, I just can't say enough about that group of men. Basically changed my life. And I know that as we organized and started that fall practice, I was lucky. I worked at the swim pool during the summer. I know my cousin, Dr. Tommy Barkley, jokingly says I was the park commission when he was growing up, because when I was in high school, I was a lifeguard down at the city pool down by the old community center. And then during college days, I helped with the Little League baseball program, ran the travel team, coached the travel team. So Tommy says he rode to swim pool with me every day. But Coach Blaylock was running the swimming pool. And so I was there, shoulder to shoulder a lot of the times. And then as I was sort of a dummy in a lot of ways working out, and my brother had instilled in me and seen that other guys, and he worked extremely hard in athletics, but he had told me about what some of the regimen that some players had done. So daggone it, I thought that come July 1, you started working out to get ready for August 1st football practice, and I did. So I reported early down to the swimming pool, and I remember Coach Blaylock coming across the hill up there, and he sees me down there, and he wanders on down and grabs a football and starts throwing with me and teaching me, and he starts showing up earlier and earlier, and as I was there, and he taught me an awful lot pre-season as I was working out, and then as we got into the practice session, he continued, and literally just went from there. And that year we had a great year. We made a real surge to come back and to come out of the ashes almost of that 0-11 year, and we won 6 ball games. And again, the community just continued to support and pour into it. And I talked about numbers, 26 players on the squad in my 9th grade year, and I think we dressed out 20 on the last ball game down at Grenada by the time we had a few injuries and so forth. Well, my senior year, we had 65 players on the team. It just everybody began to support, and the community followed us, encouraged us, and it just manifested itself into great winning. And I just had so many great teammates, and I'm talking football an awful lot. All of our sports program began to improve. Basketball was a lot better, and I was fortunate enough to play high school basketball too. And I love baseball. As you can tell, that was sort of probably the first ball I picked up, and loved that, and that group continued to go. And then we didn't even have a track, but we had a track team, and Coach Blaylock started working with that group, and then tennis. We didn't really have a tennis facility at all. I think I had said earlier as we were visiting that there were 2 tennis courts in town, public tennis courts. I think there were a couple of private courts around, I'm not sure, but down by the swimming pool there were 2 tennis courts, and one of them had a net. And so that was our tennis team. But our senior year, as we did win the Little Ten Conference championship in football my junior and senior year in high school, we won the basketball tournament in Little Ten tournament that year. And then as we were winning the Little Ten Conference track championship at Mississippi State's track. By the way, remember, we did not have a track, so we practiced on the dirt and drew it around, but we won the Little Ten Conference track meet, and daggone, the tennis team wanders across campus, and they had just won the Little Ten Conference tennis championship. So it was just a glorious year in athletics. And the thing about it, I'm an educator by training, and I just believe wholeheartedly. I know Coach Ward tried to instill this when he came in. One thing I never will forget, the first thing he did was he wanted to sign the report cards of all of his players. So not only did you have to go home and get a parent's signature on a report card before you turned it back in, you had to get Coach Ward's signature. Well, our academics just were unbelievable, I thought, as we moved through those years. And New Albany has just always had great results from their academic preparation of students, and I was the recipient of that. I just was so blessed to be able to get a scholarship to play football and baseball at Ole Miss, and that was a great time. Ole Miss was a big thing in my world. That you remember that a lot of people remember that in the early '60s, '62 and '3, they won national championships. And I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to go there and play sports and enjoy some great times. I also was asked to stay around. I was a graduate assistant freshman football coach for 4 years, so I not only got a bachelor's, master's, doctorate degree because of athletics. So I believe in athletics. I just think it's a great avenue to train and learn. There are some bad things about athletics, but there are just so many good things, and I think that's one thing the coaching staff here, Coach Ward, Coach Blaylock, Coach Brown, emphasize all the good things that you could get out of athletics, and they sort of put a magnifying glass on those, and those are what most of the players, I think, looked for and tried to fulfill were the good things. And it was just, we had so many great players, I had great teammates. There were 4 guys, by the way, that played in the backfield during that 62 and 63 falls of our undefeated season that signed Division I football scholarships. It's pretty phenomenal for a small town like New Albany. I was fortunate enough to sign with Ole Miss. Our great fullback, David Book, Little Book we call him because there was Mr. Book, and then Little Bookie as some of us called him. Book Cornell was a great fullback. He signed with Memphis State. A junior on that team, Bobby Gossett, signed with Mississippi State, had a tremendous career down there. And a sophomore, Book's little brother Roy, signed with Mississippi State, of course, and played there. So we had some great, and guys, the best little guy of all was our quarterback, Bill Hall. Such a fire plug, such a great leader. And of course, just a great group. We had and one of our linemen, George Henson, signed with the University of Wyoming. And he and I were fortunate enough to play with the high school all-star football game in August. And gosh, he went on, he was an engineering major in college, and just the academics at New Albany. I just can't say enough. Like I said, I was around academics for a full lifetime almost, spent most of my life on a college campus, and the preparation here at New Albany, I'm just amazed as I look back, and so thankful, so grateful for the schools, the leadership of the schools, the teachers that invested in us, and then the community, again, that invested in us. And if I could digress into it just popped in my mind when I talked about that. A funny thing, during recruiting, the recruiting in football at that juncture was a little bit different in that there was no social media, of course. So, stale mail letters, telephone, and home visits were the main ways that coaches could communicate with prospective players or recruits. And of course, they could have you on campus for a certain number of visits. And I was just blown away to be able to have those visits and in the home. That was real exciting. Real humbling to have coaches come to your house in New Albany, Mississippi, and then also to be able to go visit these great campuses all over the country. And of course, in my mind, Ole Miss was pretty big. I had grown up with heroes. My back door neighbor, so to speak, Ed Tay Parker, had played at Ole Miss in the early 50s. I remember seeing him come home one day with that Ole Miss leather jacket. I just thought that was the most beautiful thing in the world. Later on in the late 50s, Wayne West, big old burly, ended up being the captain of the team that played in the Sugar Bowl that year. And so, I mentioned though, then of course, JoJo Wilkins was a fifth-year senior when I was a freshman, and JoJo was so kind to me. And then my teammate Jimmy Bennett signed with Ole Miss 2 years ahead of me. So I had all those guys that I saw coming along. But during the recruiting time, we had coaches come to the home, and my mother, cooked meals. Of course, I hope y'all won't basically there weren't many places to eat in New Albany at that time either, so going out to eat was not a real big option. But mother always mother would always fix dinner when they would show up. Of course, every school's coach that came to town thought they had us locked up because mother fed them. They had the mother. They'd gotten the mother on their side, so everything was good. And they were just great people that visited us from all the universities, which I was flattered to. But I remember the night back at that time, there was a SEC signing date in the first Saturday of December. You signed the national letter of intent later on in I think it was February, but the SEC signing date was 1st of December, which was a big marker right after the football season to kind of line up your teams. And I remember as that time was coming, Coach Buster Poole and Coach Billy Mustin were the two assistant coaches at Ole Miss that had been the primary recruiters for us. And again, I just can't say enough about the other coaches that came in, and particularly I remember Billy Tohill and Paul Davis from Mississippi State were just such fine gentlemen, and I felt so close to them. It was so hard to tell them that I thought they were my friends, and hard to just tell them I wasn't going to go there. But I felt the closest to them out of all the coaches that came to town, those two. But the Thursday before Saturday signing day, like I said, Coach Buster and Coach Buston had been to our house. By that time, almost every week we had somebody there. And, I was thinking this was kind of incognito, that they were sneaking into town and back, and nobody knew they'd been there. But, people start looking at car tags and all, even back then. That was the social media, was car tags or whatever, being in town. But I remember the Thursday night before signing day, I opened the front door to meet, I thought, just Coach Mustin, and Coach John Vaught was there. And of course, I just felt like he filled up the whole doorway. He was such a big presence and such a stately gentleman, and he walks in, and I visited with Coach Vaught on campus in Oxford, but my goodness, here he was in my living room, and my mother and daddy, of course, were there and all. Well, again, it's after dark, late in the, times had already changed. This is in November-ish, and early signing days December, and I thought nobody knew had been there. Well, at 6 o'clock the next morning, my mother came and got me up out of bed and said, "You got to get up." Said, "This phone's ringing off the wall down here." That was social media. The deal was, I couldn't figure it out for the longest, but on their way into town, I mentioned that Coach Mustin and Coach Buster had been to our house a lot already. Well, coming into town, they stopped at Gray's drugstore, and Coach Vaught goes to the pharmacy counter to ask the pharmacist where Mike Robbins lived. Well, every pharmacist in Mississippi at that time had graduated from Ole Miss. Most Ole Miss folks knew who Coach Vaught was, and Pearl Deaton definitely knew who Coach Vaught was. So basically, Pearl Deaton had the phone lines hot around town that Coach Vaught had been to town, I think. But as I thought back on that, I just think that's comical that Coach Vaught used that time to get some local influence, basically, is what I think he was doing. And I learned, as I worked with Ole Miss for 4 years, that's what you do. You make sure everybody understands who's there, who's representing whom. And anyway, it was a fun time for us and the teams I played on. And as I mentioned, everything I did was a team sport. So I don't feel like I have any right to say I or me in anything, because we just had such great teams and great athletes. And my track experience is, track can be an individual sport only in the shot put, jump, and sprint. You get into what I mainly did were the relays. That's a team again. You have to do work on handoffs. You got to have other guys do good. You got to do good to help your teammates and all. We just had such great teams, great teammates. The relay team was, well, basically it was 4 football athletes, but only one full-time track athlete, and that was Kelly Thomas, of course, a great little sprinter that ended up running at Mississippi State. But Kelly sometimes would run a lot of the distances too, and in those times I might end up in some smaller track meets running the sprint. But Kelly ran most of the regular sprints too, so I was a teammate there. So I had great teammates and helpful, supportive, expecting the best out of you, but going to give their best, and just good folks. All just they encouraged, they were helpful, and in football, had a whole group of team. I mean, man, a huge group, and the big guys were good. The little guys were fast and good. And in football, there's a penalty called unnecessary roughness. Well, implied in there's some necessary roughness that has to happen. We had some bad dudes when they needed to be too. We had some tough ones. And oh my goodness, these were good, solid people, good leaders, good stewards. But when it needed to get tough, they were tough as anybody. And I'm just so proud to even. I just have chills thinking about my teammates and how good they were, how tough they were, and how fast they were, and how supportive they were. And when you looked at each other, you didn't have to look any further. You knew that you didn't have to worry about what he was going to do. Hopefully, I just go back to Book Cornell, our great fullback. Oh my goodness, what a tough, hard-nosed, good person, great athlete, but super competitor. And I remember, and he was very not soft-spoken, few words spoken anyway. But he had that look, and when he looked at you, you knew what that meant. And we looked at each other a lot through those years, and it was so fun to have people like that around. And I just can't say enough about any of them, other than they just looked at you. When little Bill Hall, excuse me, Bill, little Bill Hall called a play and looked at you, you know what that meant. And it may be that you were blocking, it may be that you were carrying the ball, or it may be he was going to throw it to you. But when he looked, you knew he expected you to do it, man. And that was like Coach Ward telling you, or Coach Black, or Coach Brown. It was you just had to do it. And I feel like I'm rambling along. I'm just so excited to talk about my boys, as Coach Ward called us. I love talking about Coach Ward. He's oh goodness, I never would have laughed at anything when he was around, but till later on, as we got to seeing each other later on, I could joke about it. He loved it too. But Coach Ward called everybody his boys. I was honored to be asked to speak at his funeral, and he had told me I was going to speak at his funeral for about 10 years. Then it happened, and I had to do it. John, I never really get his son, John Andy, as Coach Ward called him. He wasn't John Andy, he was John Andy. And he had little Bill. Bill Jr. was little Bill. Of course, Bill Jr. was huge. But anyway, but John Andy called me and said, Coach, he always called him Coach too. Said, Coach said, you supposed to speak at his funeral. I said, I'll be there. What time, when? And but I said at his funeral, that Coach Ward always referred to everybody as his boys. And it had nothing to do with age, had nothing to do with gender. The volunteer coaches downtown, he drank coffee. He loved to go downtown and round up the men who drank coffee together, and he would go down, and man, he would spend his time smoozing those guys, and he had to have them. They need to be there that afternoon to watch practice, and they sure need to be there Friday night. And those were his volunteer coaches. He had a whole staff of volunteer coaches. Well, they were part of his boys, and we were his boys, and the cheerleaders were his boys, and basically it was, my boys are going to be ready Friday night. Well, that is everybody. Everybody's going to be ready, and the mamas, the cheerleaders, I said, the majorettes, everybody's ready, and everybody was ready. And I'd go back to New Albany, just such a special place. I just think it's the best hometown in the world, and particularly I think athletics personifies that. That it is just a great place, and continued to be, and continues to be. And athletics has been a big part of that. Sports is just unbelievable. But I must say that as I've spent a full career in academics, and New Albany is, I just can't get over how well it prepared folks, and as somebody as simple-minded as I am, and it prepared me to compete with the very best, so that I could, go on and, finish, doctorate degree, and then I did postdoctorate work up at Harvard even, and I never was intimidated by anything I saw or heard. I was intimidated by the surroundings sometimes and the people, but then as I got into it, hey, I'm prepared. I can compete, just like I knew when I put on my cleats and laced up my close there at Ole Miss in athletics, I could compete. But academically, I could compete, and that's because of New Albany and the investment that our community made in good schools, good teachers, good coaches, and great parents. And parents are for everybody, and they parent the whole community, and it's just a special place. And I think sporting life, sporting world, whatever, personifies all that's good about academics, all that's good about a school, all that's good about a community, all that's good about families. And you know, I've often said, I'm just an old dumb jock guy, but hey, that's said with tongue in cheek. I know that my experience in athletics prepared me to go into the world and compete academically and every other way. And I'm just so proud and humbled to, one, be here and speak and talk to this video about New Albany, and I hope that my real feelings have shown, or how proud I am. I'm a New Albany Bulldog, and a couple of times as I've been honored at Ole Miss, and they know how red and blue I am and all. I do have to confess that for 18 years I was a maroon and white New Albany Bulldog, and proud of it, and I still am. And I'm just, I just can't say enough about what I think athletics has done for me, what New Albany's done for me, and the people of New Albany. There's so much. There's no stronger term in my vocabulary than love. I felt loved, felt supported, and I hope anybody I see and halfway know can feel my love for them because of New Albany. And let's just get down to the very basic root of, and because of my time in sports here in New Albany. And I'm so thankful for the people that invested in me. I just, that term is the only term I can come, so many people, my heroes, heck, they invested in me, and I just couldn't believe that they were coming back to reach into me and to pour into me, but they did, and they still do. As I see them, they still pour into me, and I hope that I have been able to reciprocate some for them, and hopefully for others that I have poured into some, and I feel called and committed to continue to do that all I can.
What street did you grow up on?
Oh my goodness, I told you I grew.
The north side.
I grew up on the north side. I was in Madison Avenue, just a block away, or just a couple blocks away. And I was on Madison the whole time. We lived in 3 different houses on Madison Avenue, and it was 302 Madison when I was living there. I think it's 304 now, and I don't know how in the world it ever changed, but it did. It's the same house, 302. We lived down at the very end of Madison as it dead ends. First, in a big yellow house on the right that's no longer there. We rented a portion of that house, and then we moved up the street as I was in the 3rd grade to about 300 Madison, and Mr. Carl Brown owned that house, and he owned the house next door, and his dad was living with him and his wife at that time, and Mr. Brown was having trouble with the steps for the upstairs bedroom, so they swapped houses with us. So we went to school one morning in one house, came back with everything in the driveways after school, and before we went to bed we were in the other house, and we lived there from my 4th grade on. And when I signed a scholarship at Ole Miss, we bought that house. My dad was determined that we heard an awful lot about getting an education. I'm proud to tell you, my dad was finished the 8th grade. My mother graduated from high school. And I don't know that we ever heard anything other than that you're going to get an education. Whatever it takes, you're going to get an education. And he was determined that we were going to get an education, and we did. Proud to say my brother and sister both have master's degrees. They've got board certification in several different things, and of course then I have, maybe got a couple degrees, but my being fortunate enough to sign a scholarship freed up the thinking and the finances enough that my my dad thought that he could afford to buy a house then, and so we did. And so luckily we were able to purchase a house, and they were so proud. We were proud too that they tried to fix it up all they could. They did a great job of renovating and making it a home. And when my dad died, unfortunately, 10 years later, one of the peaceful things was that my mother had a house paid for that she could live in. Of course, that was very meaningful, had to be very meaningful for my dad, and it was very comfort for the rest of us, of course. But that has nothing to do with anything other than the pride I have in what athletics did for my family, and that I grew up on the north side of town on Madison, and I'm going to tell you, a game could break out. It was, we didn't need much space, and we needed only a couple of folks, and the Robbins boys were always ready. And I jokingly, I remember, again, I speak at funerals. My goodness, I'm sorry to do that, but I was asked to speak at Wayne West's funeral, and I never will forget, Wayne was, of course, he was bigger than life. As I was about the 6th, 7th grade in there, his being at Ole Miss was just, whew, that was huge, and such a great player. He comes back and is such a gentle giant and loved on me, of course that just, whew. And, but I remember him calling the house, and of course, like I said, no cell phones. You call the landline, and he talks to the parents and asks if the Robbins boys could go with him to Inglemark to play in a ragtag baseball group. Well, it's a bunch of adults. It's not real ragtag, pretty good group, and I get to tag along and go play with the big boys and get to play with Wayne West. It just those experiences, again, it sends chills up and down my spine as I talk about them. But yes, Madison Avenue.
Who was your baseball coach at New Albany?
Well, I mentioned earlier in passing, Coach Bradley Sanders. Well, Coach Bill Ferris was baseball coach my 8th grade year. And then Bradley Sanders was the baseball coach my 9th grade year. And then my sophomore year, Bobby Bigham coached my sophomore, junior, and senior year. So I had 3 different coaches for 8th, 9th, and then 10th, and had the same coach for 10 years. So Bobby Bigham came in he was a junior high football coach for Coach Ward when Coach Ward came in. So Coach Ward brought in 2 varsity assistants and a junior high assistant, and then that was our staff.
Were you recruited by Ole Miss for baseball, or did you? What was I guess maybe your primary sport that kind of took you to Ole Miss?
Football. Of course, football was the money ticket too, for lack of a better term. They had more scholarships at that juncture. Ole Miss gave very few baseball scholarships. Jokingly, I was telling somebody last night, we were talking about baseball and stadiums and all. I never will forget when Ole Miss first built their, now they've probably renovated that new baseball facility 4 and 5 times, but they built the first Swayze Field. I happened to be at a baseball practice on a Sunday afternoon, of all things. I think I was in Cleveland at Delta State then, and probably had been home to see my mom, and on my way back stopped in Oxford. I was watching, and I was sitting by Coach Swayze in the stands, and somebody came up and said, Coach Swayze, what would you have done if you'd had a facility like this to coach in? He said, I couldn't have done much better. Said, I went to 5 World Series and won 10 SEC championships, and all I had was a bunch of football players and a bunch of basketball players. And of course, he was punching me the whole time. But Coach Swayze, when Coach Vaught took over in 1947, he hired Coach Tom Swayze, who had played football and baseball at Ole Miss, and then had played minor league baseball for a while. He hired him to be he was the first director of recruiting, football recruiting in the SEC, I think. I know he was at Ole Miss. So Coach Vaught hired him to be director of football recruiting and baseball coach. So he became the baseball coach and director of recruiting. So he was acutely aware of football players that could play another sport, and plus he had very few scholarships in baseball. That was even without limits. There was not a, now there's a limit on baseball scholarships. There was not a limit at that time, and it's 10.7 scholarships. You've probably heard that number, but for baseball, and that's being talked about. Probably will be hopefully changed, but there was not a limit on baseball scholarships. There was just a limit on money, and football was the primary breadwinner in ticket sales and all. Heck, they cost $6 then. I mean, come on. I mean, it was tough, and but the football tickets cost $6, and I guess baseball was probably 1 or 2, and basketball was less too. But football was the meal ticket, and baseball. I loved baseball. The tough part about playing football and baseball at that juncture, we did have to practice spring football, and baseball starts at the same time as far as practice is concerned. And so Coach Swayze would start practices at 12:30 during spring football season, and then it would be 2:30 after spring football was over. But so during spring football, I would go to baseball practice at 12:30, and then I'd practice baseball for 2 hours. I would have on my football pants. I'd put my thigh pads in, put my shoulder pads on, and go down the hill to football practice. And there were several of us. There were 3 or 4 of us at that time that did both. And but football was the breadwinner and the financial backbone of the baseball effort for me. Work field.
Yeah.
Work field was a football. Well, actually, we were up the hill a little bit from that, which was a nothing. And I mean, there wasn't much grass up there, and there sure wasn't any Bermuda. But and that's another thing. Coach Ford comes in, daggone, if we don't, he brings in a bunch of dirt in the middle of the football field. I mean, gets it I wouldn't call it crowned, but they did some work on the football field. And the football field was the outfield for the baseball field at that time back there. And I talked about the community, and I don't know how to say this other than just to say it, but our football field was behind what is now, what'd you call it? Is it elementary? What's
Middle school.
Middle school. Our football field was back there, work field. Had some bleachers built into the hillside on the north side of the field, which slanted. That was the home stands, so they were permanent. And on the visitor side, there was some portable bleachers, I'd call them. Well, they were pretty ragtag little old bleachers over there, but not many folks showed up anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. And then there was a hill kind of on the side, but there was one football light goal post on the visitor side. One. There was one at each end zone, but there was only one inside the end zones on about the 30-yard line. Well, it was right behind shortstop on our baseball field, and that thing didn't move. So, a shortstop, which I played in high school, had to be mindful of where he was running to go get pop flies. Sometimes the left fielder had to negotiate it. But there's very little lighting is what I'm saying, I guess. But they would move those bleachers back a little bit, and those would be the two bleachers for baseball when we played baseball. And the African American community began at that street. So not only did I feel that New Albany had support from all of New Albany, no other school in Union County had football at the time. So we had great support from anybody that could get a ride into town, from our friends in all the other schools. West Union, I have some great friends now that I run into from West Union that came to a lot of our football games because that was something to do. Myrtle, New Albany, I had cousins, going to Myrtle, and they came to all of our games. I mentioned West Union. I'm sure East Union and Ingmar did too, but because I'd run into them when I was at the swimming pool. They'd come in for the summer to come swimming, and they'd holler at me and knew me, and it was because they'd watched us play football. But also the African American community was huge supporters. I had people that I would see, and I never knew any friction of the black-white situation, if there was a situation, but of the communities. Occasionally I would be walking down the street, and somebody that I don't ever remember seeing that was a different color than I was would holler, "Hey, Robbins, is that you?" or something like that. And it's like, oh gosh, and it was because of athletics. And so we had great support from, when I say total community, and then that's one, I just can't say enough about what athletics does for communities, for people, for universities, for schools. Winning is important in anything, and athletics personifies that. And so winning was important, and everybody loved a winner. And I was just humbled that somebody knew who I was, and wanted to ask me about it. And I had seen some people all my life that had never bothered to speak to me, but after a couple touchdowns, they ran me downtown to want to talk to me, and I was humbled by that, and I'm honored by that, and I'm appreciative of that. And likewise, like I said, I love the fact that we had our African American friends that just supported us, and they wanted to know, they wanted to, they'd come out and they'd watch our baseball games. All they had to do was walk across the street, and it was never a problem. I just found it really encouraging and interesting. That's just the way it was. It's hard to, as I've heard somebody say, it's hard to believe that's the way it was, but that's just the way it was. And we had a great time. There was a red clay hill that was, we barely had room for a bench on the visitor side of the baseball field. There wasn't a visitor side. There was a red clay hill. So in other words, you could not go far and catch a foul tip over there. But that was sort of that's where most of our friends that were a different color would line up there. They'd line up either on the fence right behind home plate, or they'd line up on that hill up there and watch us play, and holler for us and cheer for us. And it was great. And I don't know if you can tell or not, I love New Albany, and I just think it's better than Mayberry. It's an insult to call it Mayberry, because it's got Mayberry big. And anyway, the first year, my junior year, Amory had won the Little Ten Conference Championship the year before, and I'm not sure exactly. I think they'd only lost one game when we played them the last game the next year. But when we beat Amory here in '62, that sealed the deal that we had won the conference championship. We played Bruce the next week, and poor old Bruce, but they beat us my ninth grade year, by the way. So let's don't forget that.
Everybody beat you your freshman year.
I remember that real well. Thank you very much. But the Amory, I'd say we beat Amory for the championship. And our senior year, again, we had beaten everybody. I'm not sure whether Amory was still in the running by the time we got there. Now, we possibly had sealed the deal before that, but I believe everybody else, well, they might not have had more than 2 wins, two losses though, so I guess we could have possibly lost again. Because I remember it was a big deal when we went to Amory the next year, and it rained a good bit and all, and I remember, I remember that Roy Cornell, I mentioned, was a sophomore, and Little Book was our fullback. Bobby Gossett was our wingback, the other halfback. I was the tailback, and Bill was our fullback. But I remember Bobby Gossett was injured for the Amory game, so Roy played the whole game. Well, we ended up. Roy scored a touchdown. We switched positions for Roy to score the first 2 touchdowns, and then he got one from his. I mean, we got down one time, and Little Book moved, and Roy played fullback, and he ran it in from the fullback spot. The next time we put him at tailback where I was, and he ran it in from that spot. The next time he scored from the wingback spot where he started. So he scored 3 touchdowns, and the next time he was out there and he caught a pass. I never had seen this play before, but Roy, oh my goodness, I think earlier I talked about how tough Book was and how much I loved him. Well, Roy was a tough one too. He had caught a pass, he was running, and there was one poor little old guy between him and the goal line. And I think if Roy had sidestepped him, he would have whipped him, but Roy, he wanted to prove how tough he was, I guess. Boy, he barreled into that guy. Well, that ball flew out and went through the end zone, and they called it a touchback. I didn't know that. I just didn't know what happened when it went all the way out of the end zone and other end. But I mean, he was on the verge of scoring his 4th touchdown, and he didn't get that one. But anyway, we beat Amory that year, the last game, and that's just a magical time, and magical folks, wonderful folks. I hope I have done justice to how much I love and respect and honor everybody that I played with, the coaches, the community, the community not even including, I don't even call the older the people that I worshipped, grew up idolizing, I don't even call them the community. They're a whole different segment themselves, and oh my goodness, what they poured into me. I just can't thank them enough. And then the total community is just wonderful.
Did you ever get to wear your Ole Miss Letterman's jacket back into New Albany?
I did. I still lived here then, so I wore it some. I don't know whether it had any. I don't know whether it had the star power or the wow factor that it had when I saw, those other guys wearing it. But I was proud of. I was proud. I am proud. I'm extremely proud to be an Ole Miss letter winner. I'm proud of it. It's still just as pretty. Those things, athletics really don't mean anything, and I mean that. They don't. Being a great athlete doesn't mean anything, but what you get out of it or what you invest from it means everything. And so for that regard, it means everything. So it does and it doesn't. It's just like, and I would say this to parents, and I hope I can say this as humbly coming from somebody that benefited from athletics more than I think anybody in the world. I mean, I just can't thank athletics enough for what it did for my life. But as I say about kids playing travel ball, playing this, playing that, if they aren't learning some life lessons, they need to do something else. If that coach is not teaching them, if those parents are not invested in them learning something other than hitting and fielding, catching and passing, they need to do something else. because athletics does not last, but life does. And life lessons are important. You need to learn that if you work hard, you can improve. No matter where you are, what you can do, you can improve. You may not be able to run a 10 flat 100, but you can run and finish. You can move something. It's just nothing quite like realizing that you can lift a weight that you couldn't lift. There's nothing quite like walking into a dark room that you couldn't walk in last year because you overcame a fear. That's what you need to learn in athletics. If not, you need to do something else. And I say that from somebody that benefited more from athletics than I think anybody deserves. As I say, these guys aren't going to play for the Yankees. They need to do something else. They aren't learning life lessons out there. So parents, if you're investing a lot and your kids are traveling all over the world playing tennis, golf, baseball, football, and they're not learning some life lessons from the way the program's being run, find them another program. Find them another sport. Because they're not going to play for the Yankees. Hopefully they can play for Northeast, Ole Miss, Delta State, Mississippi State. But if they don't, this is it for them. So what are they learning now that's going to help them when they're old and worn out like I am? I want to tell you this. It's a spiritual thing for me. As you, hopefully you can tell. I mean, it's, and if it's not, you need to do something else. And that's the reason athletics were added to educational institutions. It's part of the educational program. Well, daggone it, we get to go into bowl games and Saturday nights and Friday nights and we forget you're learning educational lessons or you're not. And it needs to be a part, particularly at the travel ball, junior high, high school, college, university. These be part of the educational environment. You need to be, those guys need to be taught. They need to learn something, and other than blocking and tackling, hitting and fielding. And I think team sports are great. Look at me. I mean, here I am, benefited from the biggest team sports there are. There are no more numbers than 11 and 9 on any team, and that's my two in sports I ended up playing the longest. And I just can't say how much I benefited from that. But I hopefully learned an awful lot of life lessons that helped me when you are slap dab, can't go any further in life. You can. And that's one thing you can learn in athletics pretty quick. You can't go another step, but you can. And sometimes it's because the coach, for lack of a better term, picked you up, kicked you, either verbally or physically. You got up and you did take another step. And a step's important. Academically, you just can't make it. But you can. You got to take a step. And emotionally, physically, in life, there are a lot of things out there. Life ain't fun all the time. You got to take another step. And hopefully, you've got a team that'll block for you a little bit. Hopefully, you've got a team that will pick you up a little bit. And if you're like this old guy that's talking to you, you got a team that picks you up a lot. You've got teammates that love on you. You've got heroes that invest in you and pull you and support you. And you got family. So I say, as much as I love, goodness, I love to tell folks I'm a moderate Ole Miss guy, and they kind of flinch when I say it. Well, I'm a moderate sports guy, halfway. Yeah. I love sports. I love all that's good about sports. I detest the bad parts of it, but there's so much good, and I just encourage you to, whoever you are, and if you're involved, put all you got into it, but it's not everything. Look to learn that if you put something into, and I taught some, and it was almost as rewarding to watch a guy finally click that math formula does work. Oh my goodness, it works. I've just got to learn that this goes next. Just like I've got to learn that I step with the left foot first rather than trying to cross over with the right foot. Those little things work. And my perception, again, and of course, again, I spent 30 years on the college campus. I've seen it on the college campus a lot. But in my perception here in New Albany, prior to Coach Ford, there was really a lot of friction between athletics and like the band. Because, New Albany was small. And to have a band, you had to have some of those football players playing. And I have an uncle who ended up being the band director at Awamba Junior College, Uncle Berlin Robbins, and, then owned a music store over in Huntsville, Alabama. But he told that when he was in high school in New Albany, he played in the band at halftime in his football uniform. He just marched out. And I've seen that on TV recently where a football player marched and played in the band. But by the time I felt that before Coach Ford, there was friction between the athletic program a little bit in the band. I don't know why I thought that. Well, daggone, I look up old Coach Ward. He was a hugger before hugging men was cool, if you know what I mean. I saw a picture the other day, an old picture of when we beat Amory here after the game, and there's a picture of him hugging me. And, I don't know if I ever remember a man hugging me. But Ward, excuse me, Coach Ward was a hugger. He hugged people, he big old, and of course he wasn't that big. He just seemed so huge to me. But he was a hugger and a patter on the back guy until. Now when he kind of growled, it was serious. And you shuddered. And kind of like a parent, you didn't want to hear it again. I know I never did. And I don't know that I ever heard him raise a voice to me or but I remember him hugging me. And but he hugged everybody. He had that ability, and it's the kind of thing, he, as his volunteer coaches started showing up at practice, he would twirl that whistle and go by and speak to them too. It wasn't like he was just telling them to come out there. He'd go by and get them, and he'd get back over here. It was real interesting. And I'm sort of a management, administrative, motivational nerd. I kind of like studying and seeing and doing all, and think I recognize things. It was just a real workshop to watch him work, do his job, do his deal, work his magic would be the time. He could work some magic now. And he could work some magic on some boys too, his boys. Most of us don't want to disappoint our parents. Of course, some of us, we get rebellious and don't want to listen to them, and I sure never was going to walk away from a conversation, if you know what I mean. Some do now, and they get away with it. I don't understand that either. Excuse me. But Coach Ward, you didn't want to disappoint him. And him hollering at you, if that never happened to me, but if he hollered at you, it's one thing. But when he has that sort of disgusted look and just disappointment that you, and you know, it wasn't because you didn't block somebody, it was because you didn't do right. And he understands not blocking somebody. Heck, he probably missed a block sometime, but he didn't like you. He didn't like you not acting right. He didn't like you being ugly to somebody and disappointed him. And sometimes it made him mad. And those are great traits. And again, I think if we're not learning life lessons, I encourage your parents, I encourage your grandparents, get your kid doing something else. Get him playing the piano, get him, I mean, those are great things. There's not anything wrong with anything unless you're not learning something, unless you're not learning how to treat people, not learning how to extend yourself, not learning how to do whatever, then you need to do something else. Because if we're not learning, we're literally dying, you know. I mean, we got to be learning all the time. And again, some of us are pretty hard-headed and don't learn things in life very well. And we're going to have trouble. We're going to have trouble with people, we're going to have trouble with marriages, we're going to have trouble with our kids, we're going to have trouble with our parents. We got to learn. And that's one thing done right, which I think that we had done right to us and for us in the early 60s there here at New Albany. Learned a lot of life lessons, and we educated a lot of good people. Oh my goodness, some of my teammates said, you just can't imagine the MDs, lawyers, PhDs, engineers coming out of that group. Some great truck drivers, some great everything. Because they learned you show up, you play hard, play fair, and a lot of times you win. If you lose, you got to deal with that too. Love my teammates, my fans. I feel like I've got fans everywhere through my life, and that sounds conceited a little bit. That's the way that's the way they make me feel, and as a result, I just feel so loved when I see. You know, I just kind of can't help myself. I light up when I see certain people, and it can be all the way across the parking lot. And I don't. And of course, I'm pretty bad about wanting to holler and go speak to them and all if it all possible. But if not, I feel better just because I saw them. Because they saw me as a little chubby kid riding my bike across town. They gave me a ride when I was walking to the swimming pool. It's just, they invested in me. And why they chose me, I don't know. And, you know, I know the good Lord, I don't know why in the world He chose to bless me so in my life, but I just try to be thankful. And, you know, it started off up here on Madison Avenue. I had a family, had parents that were working hard, trying to provide for a family of three, and then, gosh, I had an older brother and sister that were. That's the only bad thing about being the third. You got perfect brother and sister. It's hard to keep up, and but they were so supportive and helpful and dynamic. Of course, my brother let me follow him, you know, and that's how I got to play up. I always got to play with the big boys. Well, not always. I wasn't always, you know, had to have an even number or whatever. But I jokingly said it was a pretty big thrill when I got chosen, if you know what I mean. When I show up and everybody else is bigger and stronger and looking around, but yet that South Side group does. You know, there's a little old boy over at North Side we ought to pick, you know, and I enjoyed going in there and playing with those foreigners, you know, and we had a great time. Our baseball field, when we moved to the new high school after a season, it was barely I don't know if you call it, something's on that now, but it's right across. But when little Roy Cardell got up and got a little bit bigger, he about wore the self house out in left field. He could hit that ball a long way, and he'd hit it all the way across the street. About wore that house out. But anyway, we had very sparse facilities, but it was Yankee Stadium for us. It was across 15. They put up a backstop. I think there's an eating place there now. I have to go look again. I'm sorry.
Just right across from the high school.
Well, do you know how coming from Calvary, what's the Methodist church? What's that?
Yeah, I think that's Calvary.
But you turn in to go to the school down at this entrance, right across, there's a street to go straight across, and it's back toward LP Gas Company, where Rogers LP Gas Company was. There was a vacant field out there at that time. It was just, that block was vacant. And we practiced football, we ran track, we played baseball. Had put up a backstop was all there was, and played baseball. So if you could hit it to right field, you could run until they went all the way to the, if you hit it far enough, you could run until they went all the way to the road down there and got it and threw it back in, you know. And so we didn't have a fence around our baseball field. And there wasn't much grass over there. That's where we practiced football. And we dressed underneath the, well, I guess that, we dressed underneath the school there, underneath the physical ed gym. There was a locker room. Walked all the way across, which is a pretty good little way, walked across the street and over there and practiced, and then came back, dressed. And at that juncture then, we would dress in that dressing room, bus over to Workville at the middle school, and those last 2 years it was game over when we got there. We were some bad dudes, I'm telling you. It was, and I mean that in the very positive, gentlest way it is. We knew, you bet, we knew we were good, and just had so many great players. I mean, just whoo. That was out in the country almost. See, at that juncture. I mean, that was really, that church was there, the land was there, and then see, they built the superintendent's house back north of there. Was what that was. So there was nothing there. Dr. Bostwick, no, Pennebaker. Dr. Pennebaker had built the house. There was a green house on the other end of that block, back almost to where there's a convenience store at the corner back just about. There was a house that had a split level garage up there. That was Dr. Pennebaker's house. That was kind of all that was out there. And then they built that, and then that church. And I guess that road that kind of came back around may have been there, but I'm not sure it was even there. And they carved out that school out there. It was out in the boonies. Do they still play in that gymnasium?
Yes.
Isn't that something? That was probably built in the 50s.
Memorial Gymnasium.
Yeah, it had some special grant, I think, to get it built. The cafeteria and the gymnasium were built over there, and that's where we played basketball. You know, there's some bad stuff goes on in athletics, and bad people get involved in it, and they're not. Well, it's a bad thing. I don't know if they're bad people, but it just kind of gets bent the wrong way, and it can get some bad outcomes as a result, because people think that cheating's okay or that cutting a corner is okay. You know, you got to learn that, hey, you got to run to the corner before you turn, and that's the only way to get there.